Does God exist? Now, the word God, of course, is a very loaded term. Does God exist is a vital question, but what you understand by the word God may be different from what I understand by the word God. For some people, God is a cruel dictator who makes laws and imposes them to put us in a straitjacket. And he's a God who is quite willing to condemn us to an eternity of torture. For someone else, the word God may be someone who created this world and then went away and left it to its own devices. To someone else, God may be like a loving, doting grandpa. And for someone else, he may be a loving father who challenges his children but wants to share everything with them. So when we talk about God, we don't really know what the other person imagines when we use this word God. And the word God, of course, is linked with religion. Religion is our worship of God. And there has always been religion. People have always worshipped God, or the God that they thought. There have been many different kinds of religion and many different kinds of gods also. And the religions have had rivalry between one another. Religion has always been an important part of human life and human existence. It has had its good aspects. For instance, religion has produced wonderful buildings. Look at the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. Even what is left of it today is a marvelous work. How they could build that is a mystery almost. And the wonderful buildings, cathedrals in Europe, built for the glory of God. And we wonder how they were able to build such masterpieces. And the paintings and the sculptures and the music that have come and been inspired by religion is wonderful. But there have been very harmful effects of religion too. In discrimination and intolerance of others. People who had a different religion. Intolerance has been shown. And people, in the name of their God, have cruelly killed so many others and carried on wars and persecutions in the name of God. And we can ask then, do we really need God? Can we actually manage without God? Of course, at one time, human beings were in a very primitive state, and they didn't know anything, or very little. They imagined that the world was flat, and that the sun went round the world, the earth, and they imagined that thunder and lightning were acts of God, and so on. But now, through science, we have come to know so much about the world. We have come to understand infinitely more than our forefathers how the world works. And the world is a marvelous and wonderful place. It's so large, for instance, that we can't even grasp its size. To the outer limits of space which we know today, 46 billion light years. In other words, traveling at the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second, it would take us 46 billion years to reach the edge of the universe that we know today. And there are trillions of galaxies and stars. The mind is overwhelmed with the size of the universe, and furthermore, this is not a chaotic universe. It is an ordered universe right down to the very smallest atom. Everything is hanging together in a wonderful and mysterious kind of way, so much so that we stand in front of the universe and we are amazed. We are living in the midst of a mystery which we can't understand. But we know one thing, that we are able to understand it, that we are able to eventually come to understand everything about the universe for two reasons. One is that the universe is an intelligible unit. It is not just chaotic, random, but it is intelligible throughout. And for the other reason is that we have a brain which is capable of understanding. We don't have to go out into the universe to be amazed at the complexity and the wonder of the world in which we are living. We just have to go to our own brain and see what a computer-like instrument we have, each one of us, in our own heads. Something that we have not been able to understand yet, hardly scratch the surface. And we don't know what we will come to know in the future. Some years ago, I remember listening to an interview with this old lady, and she was in the cockpit of a supersonic jet. And she was saying how when she was a small girl, the Wright brothers had not yet invented the aeroplane, that they had not yet struggled to get this instrument which they had invented off the ground. And yet, in her own lifetime, she had seen the invention of an aeroplane right to sitting in the cockpit of a supersonic jet. Such an advance by science in the life of one person. And what science and technology will invent, discover, and make in the future, we can hardly imagine now. But we know that we are able to do that. We have the capacity. And so we can ask the question, do we need God? We can live our life quite happily without God. If I get sick, I don't go to a priest. I first go to a doctor, because the doctor knows what is the cause of my sickness, and he can give me a remedy. Science has found the answers to many things which in the past people would pray to God or pray to their God for, because we have discovered the cause and the remedy. And we can live quite comfortably without God. God is okay, convenient to know there is a God, but I can manage quite well without Him. And many people do manage without God. Their life is full, and they go from one to another, and they also can be very good people too. So the question is then, is God necessary anymore for modern man, now that we have advanced in science and technology so far, and the future also looks so bright? Just let's take a break. Welcome back to the Word of God. So the question is, do we need God? Does God exist? Do we have to ask this question? Well, of course, we don't have to ask the question, but the question won't go away either, because the question always comes back, where did this world come from? It's a wonderful world. It's a mysterious world, an amazing universe. But where did it come from? Well, I have heard people say, I wouldn't be troubled if the world came from nothing. Well, to say that the world came from nothing doesn't really hold any water, because nothing is a philosophical term meaning the complete denial of existence, the complete negation of all being. Nothing means there is absolutely no thing. And nothing can come from nothing. If there is ever in the past nothing at all existing anywhere, then nothing will ever exist, because nothing can come from non-existence. And so there has to be some being which exists because it is existence, and doesn't have a cause because it doesn't need a cause. It exists by its own power, by its own nature, you might say. Otherwise, we can never have anything existing, but there is this world in which we are existing, and we ourselves are existing, and so there has to be a being which exists by itself. Now, I don't want to use the word God just yet, because that brings all kinds of feelings with it. There has to be a being which exists by its own power and nature. I can give an example which I heard. Namely, let us say you have a book which answers all my questions, and I want to read that book. And so I asked you, can I borrow your book? And you say, sure, but I don't have it. I gave it to my wife. I'll ask her for it. And you go to your wife and you say, have you got the book? And she says, no, I gave it to my daughter. And she is reading it. And you go to the daughter and say, no, I gave it to my teacher because it's very good and I thought my teacher would like to read it. And you go to the teacher and the teacher says, no, I gave it to my friend. You go to the friend and I gave it to my cousin, and so on. There has to come a time when you meet the person who actually has the book. And if we never come to the person who actually has the book, there really is no book at all. And the universe is like that. We have to come eventually to a being who exists because he does exist by his own nature. Now this being who exists by his own and is the cause of the universe in which we are living now must be an intelligent being, because the world itself is totally intelligible. And that's why we have science. And that's why the sciences can develop, because of the underlying assumption that the world is completely intelligible. And therefore, the being who is responsible for this world must also be an intelligent being. And with intelligence, that being can decide what to do. And that being must be able to create out of nothing, because there is nothing except the being. But can we say anything more about this supreme being responsible for the universe in which we live? We can't say anything, really. But the point is that many people, thousands of people throughout the ages, have been speaking about this supreme being. But the fact is, no one has ever seen this being. So no one has any direct knowledge of this being. We know that the being exists because otherwise we wouldn't exist. But we can say nothing about him apart from what I have just said, because he can't be seen and he is not part of the universe. It is said that Khrushchev, who was the General Secretary in the Soviet Union in the 1960s, after they sent the astronaut into space and he had returned, Khrushchev said in a public meeting, our astronaut went into space and looked everywhere and he couldn't find God. It's true, we won't find God in the universe because he's not part of the universe. He is the cause of the universe, this being whom people call God. He is not part of the universe. He is the cause of the universe. He is outside the universe. He is beyond the universe. And so we can't see him and we can't meet him. Can we know him? No, unless that being were to come into the universe itself, were to come into our world in a way that we could see him, touch him, hear him. Then we could come to know the nature of the being who is the cause of this universe. He has to come into our realm of knowledge, which is the realm of science, because science observes. And we are all, in one way, scientists, in the sense that we all observe the universe. We observe the world, and we observe one another. All our knowledge comes through our five senses of sight, touch, taste, smell, and hearing. They have to come through these five senses. All knowledge is first of all in our senses. And if we are to know the nature of the God of the universe, that God has to come to us, and to come to us in a human way, so that we can know Him in a human way. And has He come? This is the great mystery, that God has indeed come into this world. And He has come in a human way. And He has spoken to us in a human language. We look at one of the books in the New Testament called the Letter to the Hebrews, the very first chapter, the very first verse. The writer says, in the past, God spoke to us in varied ways through prophets, through ordinary people. But God never spoke to them in a human way. He spoke to them through their own inspirations. And some of them understood well, and others didn't understand well. And they wrote about God. And they wrote some true things about God, but they also had their own prejudices about God. That in these latter times, God Himself has sent His Son into this world, and He has spoken to us in a human way. And we must study this human being who has come from God and listen to what He says and discover what is the true nature of God. Brothers and sisters, that person is Jesus, whom we call the Christ.